so strange to me. You know, I'm an author, so you don't get a lot of applause like that for writing a book.
Well, thank you for writing it. Thank you for being here. Congratulations. So I guess go back to a couple of years ago when you first heard probably from Joel Edgerton, who's the writer-director and plays the leader of Love in Action. What was your reaction when you heard from him, and did you have any hesitation?
Definitely. I was like, what is this Australian straight man doing with my story? And why is everyone going to be Australian? But Joel, actually, I'd seen him doing press for Loving, and on that press tour, he had, talked a lot about marriage equality and how it was important to align that with the sort of interracial marriage equality that he was talking about in the movie. And then whenever we met, he wanted to meet with so many survivors of conversion therapy. And he was taking a lot of care to get the facts right. I joke, like, Joel I don't have that many straight male friends, but Joel's a good one to have. He's like, one of the best. And we were very specific about what we wanted to come out of this. I'd written my book, which was a very internal struggle. I wrote it for survivors, and I wrote it for myself and my family. And for this movie, we were very interested in trying to educate a lot of the parents or people around LGBTQ youth in places like where I grew up. And so Joel said, I'm going to try to get A-list actors on this film so that we can elevate the discussion and really try to make it something that somebody like your parents would have seen in your small town.
Yeah, and you mentioned Loving, which is a really important film for him. Also, his first movie as a director is called The Gift. And I recommend that. It's different. It's a thriller, but it's about, he plays a guy, it's kind of a spoiler, but who's a victim of bullying in childhood, which I think does connect in the psychological.
Yeah, Joel's very interested in bullying, not being a bully. Yeah, that's going to be quoted, and then I'm going to be run over. No, he grew up in a community that often bullied other people, and I think injustice really upsets him. And so I think it's a common theme.
You mentioned some of the cast, and I do want to ask you about having your step-parents be Nicole Kidman and Russell Crowe. But really important to mention first, there are people in this film like Cherry Jones, who has one scene.
Yeah, I wrote Joel this crazy 4-page document about LGBTQ inclusion, and I said, you need to get as many LGBTQ actors in the Love and Action scenes. And then he also got Cherry Jones to play, the person who basically gives me reason at a point when I really need it. And the real Dr. Julie is her real name, showed up at the premiere in LA, and it was so wonderful. But yeah, he really populated all of the LIA sections with a lot of people who were dealing or had dealt with these issues. And then, Lucas himself, as he talked about in his New York, it was Vulture? Or
New York Magazine.
Yeah, New York Mag. Peace is sexually fluid, and so that was something that I was really concerned about as well, because I needed someone who could really understand the shame to get this right. And another thing is Joel, from the very beginning, he worked with every major LGBTQ group in the country. And that was a really big deal for me.
What was it like meeting Lucas? It must have been surreal. Had you already been cast, or were you meeting him as like a...
I got to meet him in Dumbo, actually. And that was a real day because I just watched Manchester by the Sea. And I loved him in it so much. And I was so nervous to meet him. And then he was even more nervous than I was to meet me, because he read the book and he really loved it. And he was like, I want to do it right. And I was standing in front of this person who was so sensitive, so careful about what he said and how he said it. And I was just completely enthralled by the idea of him playing me.
And he let you into his department.
He actually said, you've shown me so much of your life let me show you mine. And he took me to his childhood home. And I met Peter Hedges, his father, the director, and I was like fangirling out there. And then he showed me his childhood bedroom, and like I got to see his marked up copy of Boy Race, which I've heard is a trick like actors do to try to get you on their side. But actually, I was a school teacher for 6 years, so I can tell when marginalia is real. And I was like, oh, these are real notes.
So I wanted to share something. I interviewed him a few weeks ago about the film, and we were talking about really one of the most difficult scenes for all of us to watch, which is after the sexual assault. And Joel made a choice to show him just openly sobbing, which you don't see men do very often. And I asked him sort of how he was able to conjure that, and I wrote down what he said, and I wanted to share it with you. He said it came kind of late in the process, I think, about a month and a half or 2 months in. He said, quote, "It was killing me to think that I wasn't doing a good enough job. I felt such a massive responsibility to Jared's story because of what an amazing person he is. And some of my emotion in that scene is a reflection of that."
That's going to make me cry. You know, the first cut of the film didn't have that scene in it. And so I didn't see that scene until I was at Telluride Film Festival. And it was just really raw, and it felt very real. So I can see where that came from. I mean, Lucas was so worried that he wasn't going to get things right. And I didn't know how to make him feel better about it, because he would ask me these specific questions that were like, what did you feel in this moment? And, I reconstructed it as best I could in the memoir, but, how do you describe what it's like to have this sort of soul murder that's happening to you? How do you describe the complexity of what you're thinking and what you're feeling? I don't know how to do it. My book is an imperfect book because I can't. But I think a lot of books are imperfect in that way. Like, we try to get at something very real and very raw, and I don't know how to describe it,
Did it make it difficult to watch the film the first time?
The first time I felt so embarrassed, actually. When I watched it, I watched it with my husband, and Joel was sitting next to me, and I was so nervous that Joel would be looking at my face while I was watching it. Because you know how you do when, you're like, do you like it? And I actually, at one point, I had so many beers because I was so nervous. I don't usually drink beer, if that tells you anything. And I had to go to the bathroom, and I remember going over to Joel and being like, I have to go to the bathroom, but it's not because the movie's bad. I promise, I just have to go to the bathroom. And so I was also just, I saw Lucas going through this terrible ordeal, and all I could think at the time was, why did I say yes? And of course it's obvious, when I watched it another time and was able to not feel that shame and guilt, but there's a default in my head of shaming myself.
Yeah. I'm going to sort of ask about your real parents, and then, as we said, your movie parents. Nicole Kidman is great. She just brings such heart to roles like this. And Russell Crowe, that could have easily tipped over into the film's villainous character. It doesn't. Can you share about what happened when your dad and Russell?
Oh my God, yeah. This is a crazy story. So I got a phone call. I was in New York. I wasn't on set. And the producer of the film, Carrie Roberts, says, "Do you know where Russell Crowe is?" It's actually just a phone call where she said that. And I was like, how in the hell would I know where Russell Crowe is? I've never met Russell Crowe. I haven't been on the set with him yet. And she was like, well, we have reason to believe that he's flown a private jet to your father's church. And I was like, shut the hell up. And hung up. And then 2 hours later, I get a phone call from my dad, and he's like, you'll never guess what just happened. Did Russell Crowe suddenly show up at your church unexpected? Yes. And actually, they talked a lot, and my dad gave him the pen that's at the end of this film. And Russell was very affected by my dad. It was kind of like, there are really charismatic people in the world. My dad is one of them. John Smith, the real Victor Sykes, is another. And it's funny to watch these really seasoned, worldly people come into contact with someone who is genuine, also sometimes wrong, sometimes very wrong, but very genuine. They're at their charisma from a very genuine place, and it's a very dangerous combo. And Russell was very affected by it. He was texting with my dad when he saw the film again in New York at the premiere, and he was like texting Dad, and I was like, this is really weird. What is happening? Yeah, that happened. And then Nicole is like a dream. I mean, I've obsessed over, as any good gay does. And the wig in this is not exaggerated, let me tell you that. Just look at the Instagram pics of my mom and you'll see it. But yeah, she was wonderful, and she really wanted to get the part right. But it was funny. She was also very nervous about the role because it was a real person. And she'd done, the lion mom, and now she's doing the boy race mom, and I'm sure that's daunting. And Mom was scheduled to actually go on set at the big scene at the end where she is at the Peabody and she says, like, I fell into line. It's a big moment, And Mom was supposed to be there that day. And Nicole at the last minute was like, I can't do it in front of her. And we understood, but it was just a really interesting moment to see like that somebody like Nicole Kidman, who has been in so many movies and is so great, could be nervous about playing somebody.
You're in the film.
Briefly. It's really disturbing. Like, Joel has some interesting ideas in his head. There's a reason he made like a suspense thriller movie. He was like, what if you played one of the people who never left? And so I'm in the back at the first of the movie, whenever the people in the blue shirts are filing in, I'm one of them. And it was a really disturbing, I went along with it. He was like, it wasn't like he was like, you have to do this. But I thought it was an interesting thing to sort of like have a little what if moment. Like, what if it stayed?
Yeah, we'll go to questions from the audience, but just to mention John Smith again, kind of to relate to that, the idea of never leaving. He, as we all just saw in the end titles, lives with his husband, and says that the success rate for gay conversion therapy is 0%. But there are
Surprise.
People. There are people who probably have gotten married and have kids, or.
Yes, that's called, I just learned this not too long ago, a mixed orientation marriage. That's a real thing, and I actually don't, in a lot of southern towns, not just southern, but a lot of towns, it's hard still to be open, and so a lot of people make an arrangement, and I get that. Smid was living that life for a long time with Bylene, his second wife, I think. And yeah, it's tough to understand where he's coming from now because he's changed so much. But the person that I see is still the abuser. I know that he's doing all the right things. He donated all of his materials to the Smithsonian, which is a big deal, so that conversion therapy is forever recorded in American history. And he actually went along with our podcast. I was working with Radiolab producers to do a podcast called Unerased. It's out now. And he's on the 4th episode. And it's like, it's intense. He's crying on it. He's talking about what he did wrong. And I'm sure it weighs heavily on him to realize that he's responsible for multiple suicides. When he put his apology on the internet, on his website, the first response that came up was a list of people who had committed suicide after being in love and action.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Roman. I'm a journalist, producer, and writer. In 2004, I read an article about a gay Mormon named Henry Strickland who committed suicide in Los Angeles, California. he could rectify his Mormonism, his religion with his homosexuality. I decided to write a play and went undercover in the Mormon church for a year in Evergreen and went through conversion therapy myself. So I wrote the play, it was out in 2008. The biggest issue that I had in the experience, because one of the things that people that went through Evergreen would tell me is if Mormonism is the Lord's church, then Evergreen is the Lord's gay bar. And so it's a rough road, and as an outsider, it's a rough road. And so, at the time, gay Mormons had the highest suicide rate in the country. I don't know if that's still the case. The biggest thing I had as a writer and a journalist in this experience was rectifying this idea of was suicide a better option, because these gay men were using Evergreen as an opportunity to be close to other gay men. Some of them, most of them, because it was the only opportunity they would get to spend with gay men. So a lot of them would confess to me that they would go to these meetings because they could be around men that were gay and would go along with it. And so that question was posed to me a lot. In your opinion, which was better? Because they were struggling so hard and they were working so hard.
All right. So if public people in the back didn't hear. How to summarize that? He had an experience with the Mormon Church, and wherein the question was posed: is suicide a better option?
Yeah. Wow. I don't think.
Not that I think it's a better option.
Right? Yeah.
But I couldn't answer the question after everything I experienced.
I get what you're saying. In some situations, it feels so hopeless that there seems to be no other way out. I hope that there's a better option than suicide. I mean, if there was for me, it's not necessarily shown in the film, but in the book it talks a lot more about my suicidal ideation. And I came very close to it. I think if my mom actually asked me, are you going to commit suicide? Because she'd heard all these stories. And I said yes. And then my mom said, well, I'd rather have a living gay son than a dead gay son because you're going to be gay either way. So which one do you want? That's why I think it's so important to educate people around these communities, to try to, the low bar, this is what's crazy, this is the low bar for human decency, is I don't care where you are politically. I mean, I do personally, but not for the rhetorical reasons that I'm about to say. I don't care where you are politically. I don't care where you are in what religion you're in. Let's get to a place where we can admit that this is torture and that people are not going to change. And that's the baseline. And then we can move up. It's a very low bar, but it's an incredibly hard one.
You've spoken quite a bit about how you would love to have a conversation with Mike Pence.
I would do it. That's the thing. I think I would actually talk to him because, not that I think it would ever work, because obviously he's been a big adversary to the LGBTQ community for a long time and is most likely behind the desire to erase trans people from our society. But I think that, I would like to know where it's coming from, where all of the bigotry is really coming from. It's a tough question.
Somebody else in the back. Yeah. Did you guys hear? It's about getting the film out to the LGBT community.
Unfortunately, it's very much a business. So if people buy tickets in these cities, then it can go wider. And it's a really, I find it very frustrating that that's how we have to do it, because it's most of you know that conversion therapy is not great. I hope you know it by now. This was not a pro-conversion therapy film. But,
this was based on your experience, but there are horrors like electroshock therapy.
Yeah, there are worse things, and the history of the United States is riddled with it. The Eisenhower administration used to send off people in their administration who were found out as LGBTQ to St. Elizabeth's Hospital outside of Washington, D.C. to get lobotomies or worse. So this has a long, prevalent history, but I think that, like yesterday at a screening at Angelica, 2 young girls living in New York came up to me and they gave me letters that basically said that they weren't out and that this film was helping them to figure out a way to talk to their parents. And that meant a lot. And I think that there's a very strange thing that conversion therapy shows about the country. So San Rafael, California, just 10 miles from San Francisco, which is like the gay hub, 10 miles from there is where Love in Action was born. It's where the ex-gay movement started. And that's the modern ex-gay movement. And that's, I think, very telling. These things go on everywhere. And there are 2 such clinics in New York City that I know of, that after the screening, I always get this. Somebody comes up and says, did you know that on that block there's a conversion therapy place? And I find that so shocking, but also not shocking,
Is there a woman who has a question?
Good one. That's important.
Yes. Is there a woman?
Yeah. Is there a woman at the Voyage? You all heard it? Yeah, like, how did I balance my parents' real lives with this story? I stayed up for a year worried after I'd written the first draft, and I was, it takes forever to publish a book, and I was just like, oh my God, my family's gonna hate me, I don't know what to do. I was very careful in their depiction. I didn't lie, but I showed the whole picture. I held them accountable for what they did, which means I didn't let them off the hook for making a terrible mistake that could have killed me. They know that. My mom's apologized every day since then, to the point where I'm like, Mom, just shut up, it's fine. But I did hold them accountable, but I also felt like in order to really show the true evil that takes root in some of these communities, the kind of bigotry that kills, I had to show the full picture of who they were and how they got caught up in it. My mom was married at 16, and her entire life was my dad in many ways. And now she's becoming her own person. It's very exciting to watch. But yeah, I was really worried about that. But I think they're shown with compassion.
So has your dad seen the movie?
No. Dad actually just called today, and we were not talking for a couple of weeks because it gets real tense. And like 2 weeks ago, his church held a vote to see if they should vote him out of the church because of what's happening. And that's tough. They resoundingly did not. There were like 2 people who started it, and I hope they're out of that church by now. But he called today and he said, I'm going to talk to you as a father right now, like not as who I am. And he said, I really am so proud of your success. And that was a big deal. He doesn't always do that, And yeah, it's incredibly complicated. And I hope he sees it. Russell Crowe texted him and said everything was good. So that should work.
One more. Yes.
You would like to speak to Mike Pence. I'd like to know if you think your father's fear is any different than what Mike Pence would have to say.
Yes. Is your father's fear different from what Mike Pence would have to say to you?
I think when you go up in terms of power, you hold people more accountable. Like Bellevue Baptist Church, which suggested that I go to conversion therapy to my dad. I hold them accountable, and I think you should shout at people in power, and you should talk to people on the ground, if you can, if they're reasonable. So I tend to think that Mike Pence is more cynical. I think that probably he knows that it sells for him to be a bigot. Trump certainly knows. And so it's harder for me to have that kind of compassion for Michael. But I'm stealing that, I'm going to use that. That being said, I'd still talk to him like I was a human being and he was a human being, even if he's not.
Can you mention the podcast again, just so everybody
Yes.
knows about? Because
Thank
this is a
you
great
for
way.
that
I mean, there's a wealth of information out there. For people
Oh yeah,
who want to
I
know
mean,
more.
so it's called Unerased. It's out now, the first episode. It's with the producers of Radiolab. It's fantastic. It's a 4-part series that looks at the full history of conversion therapy. It's actually the thing I'm most excited about right now, because it's been working with the Smithsonian and a bunch of LGBTQ organizations to get it all right. And I think it's a big jumping off point. They're also making a ton of resources for people who've either been through conversion therapy or were considering it, or are in a bigoted area. And I'll end on a positive note, because the second episode I was listening to again today, and they talk about this group called the Mama Bears. And they're these mothers, often in towns that are a bit bigoted, and they have to be a little bit quiet, or else they get kicked out or whatever. And they have this online group called the Mama Bears, and they protect their cubs. And my mom's a part of it, and I was listening to this episode, and it just gave me so much hope, because these are people who you would never know are supporters, and some of them are more, outwardly supportive. They go to like pride parades and offer hugs and stuff, and it's really sweet. But I think it gave me so much hope, because I think that there are a lot of people who are just waiting to come out in the way that my mom came out. And I'm hoping that this film inspires a lot more people to do that. Moms are the best, actually.
Yeah, I think this is what makes it so special, because this is a conversation that hasn't really been had much, even though it's been going on for, as you said, decades. So I want to thank the audience, and also remind everybody that Tuesday is Election Day. Please vote.
Please vote.
Please tell all your friends. And thank you so much for being here to talk to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.